Hey, door number 3, good pick. This is a special door. It's the only one with a special intro. So we're going to be covering Mori, and I'm going to teleport to the Japanese garden to explain the hook. Here we are today in Portland's Japanese garden to talk about the game Mori. In Latin, Mori means death. In Spanish, it means I died. In Japanese, it means forest. In Afrikaans, it means, oops, Google Translate did not respond, please try again. But what does it mean in English? Mori has design by Daniel Newman and art by Beth Sobel. And the hook is, it's trick-taking with dice, but the dice are may follow while the cards are must follow. I did some design development on this game, and so the deck in Mori is made up of 4 suits numbered 0 through 10. On the cards, there is below every rank and suit either a leaf, nothing, or a skull. Leaves are good points, skulls are bad points. There's also these X cards in the game. Here we have the game partially set up for 4 players, so depending on the player count, you're actually going to modify the deck. So at 5 players, you use all the cards plus an extra X added to the deck. At 4, you're just going to remove the 10s and 0s, and at 3, you're going to remove the 8s and 9s of each suit. With the deck set up, you're going to shuffle and deal 9 cards to each player and give each player 2 X cards, which will go into their hand. Speaking of hand, each player is going to get dealt a dice in hand card to be put in front of them. This is the score tracker, which I'll just remove for now until we go talk about the score near the end. And then finally, every hand you're going to roll these 10 dice. They all are the same, they're d6s, and 4 of the sides are just the 4 suits in the game. So as you can see, maybe here is like the sunflower suit, the I don't know my flower suit, the green flower suit, and then I think that's a rose. We'll go with it. And then the red flower suit. And then the last 2 sides are actually going to just be X's, just like those X cards there. Each hand you would roll the dice, making sure to re-roll any dice that fell off the table when you're me and don't know how to roll dice properly. And then you're going to put all the dice, depending on their face, onto the matching spot. So this board is actually double-sided. This is, I think, the prettier side with the flowers on them. But for now, we're actually just going to use the very simple side because it'll help be a little clearer for the teach. So the reds will go into their designated spots. The X's will go in the center there. I wish I knew the flower names. And then you'll put all the rest into their correct spot. So in the center here, you're going to have kind of the die pool. With the game set up, the start player is going to be the person who last smelled a flower. Let's say it is this skeleton, who is aptly holding a rose, I believe. They are going to play a card to the trick. Let's say to start the first trick, this rose skeleton hand led to the trick of 4 in sunflower. Mori is a must-follow game, so going to the next player, the shield here, they have to play one of their sunflower cards. Interestingly, if they wanted to, they could play this X into the trick. These can be played at any time, even if you could follow. But they're looking at their cards here. They see the 4 has a leaf on it. That's a 1 point, and that's good. So maybe they want that, especially because they have a 5 leaf here, which is another point. So they'll play that into the trick, and they're currently winning it, and it's worth 2 points right now. Then coming to Bulbasaur, they can either play this 8, or again, they can play any one of their X's. Let's say they play the 8. It has a skull on it, so it actually is minus 1 point, but they think the trick is worth it. Finally, coming to Totoro here, they only have the 9, and what's interesting is they could play this to win the trick, which will get them a die, which I'll explain in a little bit, but maybe they think since the 9 has 2 skulls on it, and it'll make the trick negative, they don't want to. So they're actually going to play one of the X's into the trick. So how the game works is the highest of the lead suit wins, unless there was trump played, which it hasn't yet, so we'll just ignore that for now. So the Bulbasaur player will collect the trick, and the winner of the trick will make sure to keep any of these X cards face up so players know how many they have, because it's important for scoring later. So Ivysaur won the trick, and they get to pick any die. Maybe they take this purple one here, and any die taken goes into dice in hand. Effectively, this is just like a card in their hand, except the dice are a little bit special. They're may follow, instead of the cards, which are must follow. Pretty wacky, and I'll get into kind of the implications of that, but for now, let's just lead to another trick. So Bulbasaur, since they won, they're just going to play this 5 into the trick. So Totoro played a 6, and now coming to the rose skeleton hand, they don't have any green in their hand, so they can play whatever they want, including these X's. But maybe they want to take advantage of the trumping system in the game. Because how it works is, the suit that is led will dictate what the trump is for the trick. Not for the round, just for that specific trick. So since green was led, green, which is spring, gets trumped by the next season, which is summer. And you can see that up here, where the crown in the yellow area is as an arrow trumping over the green. So since this trick is worth points right now, the skeleton really wants to trump in. So they have the 1 in the summer suit, which is worth 3 points, so they're going to trump in here. The mirror shield would have to be playing this green, and they don't want to, so maybe they're going to throw in this X. After winning the trick, the skeleton hand is going to take one of the X's, and then they're going to lead a 5 red. Coming to the shield, they're just going to play a green 2. Not the best choice, but just for this example, it works really well. So this isn't trump at all, because since it was led red, the trump is actually purple for this trick, which gets nicely to Ivysaur's hand, because even though they have red, they could play it with the red 9 and possibly win, but since that has 2 skulls on it, maybe they don't want to. And they don't want to play this 1, because that's worth 3 points, and they'll just lose it to the skeleton hand over here. So instead, since dice can be may follow, they don't have to play the must follows here or the X's. They could just play one of the dies in their hand. So now they're trumping in with the purple. If Totoro didn't have any reds in hand, they could also trump in with a purple that's higher, and this would win. You know, even this 1 would win, because any card is higher than this. This is just kind of like the suit, if you can imagine it like that. But Totoro did not have that, so they were having to must follow, and maybe they toss out this 7 skull. Any dice used can just be discarded for now, and Ivysaur would take the trick and then lead to the next trick, again after taking a die. If they lead this, maybe they took this green and then led that, that would be the lead suit for the trick. With this trick example continuing, if it gets to this skull hand here, again, they could follow suit with one of the greens. They don't have a green, but for example here, maybe they want to play one of the X dice in their hand. This is just like the X card. It can be played whenever. And since green was led, let's say mirror suit just trumped in with their sunflower. So dice would win the trick by playing the highest trump. They'll collect the trick like normal, and any dice that aren't X's are just discarded. But X dice are actually important, and they're treated just like X cards, where they're kept to the side. It's important to keep a track of how many X players have in the game, because it's important for scoring. Let's say the shield took the X here. So X cards are interesting because if they're led, then the next player is going to dictate the suit. But if everyone plays an X card, Ivysaur up here, you know, played this, and Totoro had an X card, so they still played that, and so did the hand here. The first played X card will win the trick, which is really rough when it comes to how X's score. So play like this continues until the last die is taken, so that's 10 tricks for every player count. And then players, maybe depending on how much they won or didn't win, will actually have cards left in hand, and then they'll score those as well. So part of the game is knowing when to hold onto those high point cards in your hand. So maybe if this was the hand, well, that's kind of an extreme example, but say maybe this was the hand of the bottom right player here, they would score 3 points but lose 2 because they kept that in hand. So that would go into their score pile as well. Also, any X dice in hand will be scored by that player as well. So how the scoring works, we'll just look at this table here, really simple. Leaves are +1 point, skulls are -1 point, and then you are going to look at whoever has the most X's, they're going to lose 1 point per X, and then whoever has the second most X's actually gets a point per X. At the end of this example, the shield here actually got 6 X cards and dice, so they're losing 6 points, but over here, the skeleton hand got 2. They got the second most, so they're going to get 2 points. So getting the most X's is bad, but getting the second most is actually good. And ties are friendly in a way. So if, let's say, it was 4 and 4, these players would actually lose 4 points each, and then the second most over here, Ivysaur, would actually get the point. Then you would collect the cards, shuffle up and deal, re-roll the 10 dice for the next hand, and you'll play rounds per player, and then whoever has the most points at the end wins. So that is Mori, and again, this is a Kickstarter preview, so take everything I say with a grain of salt, but also double again, I developed this game, so I'm not going to do kind of a final thoughts in a way. It's just going to be more a kind of development diary, because I think that would be a little bit more fun and a lot less bias because of course I'm biased. I helped bring this game to life. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit back and forth between where it started, what I helped develop, and then where it became, because I think that's really interesting. I wrote a development diary for All Play to have in their Kickstarter, so I'm going to touch on a little bit of that. So if you've read that, I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail and kind of show off a little bit as well, because video has visual aids, which is different than text. This is the box that Daniel was carrying Seasons in when I saw it at PAX Unplugged. So rewinding back, this game with design by Daniel and art by Beth Sobel. Oh, gorgeous. We'll get into the production later. Actually, we'll get into the production now. I think this is great production. Look at this. Look at this art. You kidding me? Woo! And the fact that the board is double-sided for like really clean, but then also really beautiful, if you want it that way. And the dice are so good. Okay. Production aside. Wonderful, wonderful production. But again, bias, super bias, mega bias, triple, quadruple, quintuple bias. This was the original game. So it was called Seasons because, you know, the trumping mechanism where the later season trumps the earlier season when it's the trick that's led. I first saw it at PAX Unplugged. Daniel and Joe and Chad from All Play were shown me, and we played a 5-player game actually, which was interesting. But in the original game, there were dice, and the dice were bad. Like you couldn't lead with them, and if you had them at the end, you scored them, and they were -2 points. It was bad. And when a player won a trick, they would take a die. So just like how Mori is. Except the players who didn't win a trick, the losers, would draw a card from the deck. And this is the original deck. You can kind of see the original art where those were the positive points, and then the negative points were these minus stars, these minus red stars. So the players would draw a card from the deck, and it would be stronger cards, but of all the different suits. So one of the first things I wanted to change in the development was to remove the deck, because often players would, classic trick-taking game, try to short suit or be void in a suit. I try to use different terminology just in case people don't know. But they try to short suit, and so then they could take advantage of the trumping system, you know? So get all the summers out so that the next time someone leads summer, they can trump in with fall. And what I noticed was oftentimes players would short suit and then they would randomly draw back in because of the draw pile. So I wanted to cut out the draw pile and try to play around with the idea of players just having different hand sizes and seeing if it was fine if they didn't have equal hand sizes. The tough part about that is then you get to a situation where if you if you have different hand sizes in a trick taker, it kind of opens up the realm of like, well, how does a round end? Is it when someone's out of cards? And I was like, well, I can't do that because a big part of Mori and Seasons is you score the cards left in hand. And that's a fun thing to have happen. Scoring the cards left in hand leads players who maybe didn't win a lot of tricks to cleverly just kind of dip and dive and dodge out of the way of certain tricks and hold on to those points, right? Because if at the end of a hand, you're sitting there with a 1 and you didn't have it get pulled out over the course of the trick play, it's worth 3 points. And so that feels good. You know, those like feel good moments in a hand. I was watching a Marvel Snap GDC talk where they were talking about how originally they had, when you lost in Marvel Snap, it would say like you lose. And what they decided was they wanted to twist it to where, because there's a mechanism in the game Marvel Snap where you can get out of there without losing something important to you. And even though you lost, they rephrased it to escaped. So players don't feel like they, you know, didn't do too well. They actually feel like they got away with some things. So I wanted like a little bit of that feeling to where even if you didn't win too many tricks and didn't win too many points, if you held a card in your hand and it was worth a lot of points, that feels good for the player. So I like that a lot. But so, getting back to the original thing. So how do you end the hand, right? And we were talking about whether you go until someone's out of cards, but then you have variable tricks. And sometimes in a game like this where it's hard to... there's already a lot going on. I think it's definitely a next step trick taker. I think it's tough for players to cognitively be surprised for how long a round will end. And so what we decided to do was have the dice, because they're so important in the game, be the driver of how many tricks you take. So it's always 10, no matter the player count, which I think feels great. So getting way back, remove the deck. Now the dice are what triggered the end of the game. So then it was a situation where the players were able to short suit in interesting ways and able to trump in interesting ways. But I didn't think it was happening too much. I wanted it to happen more. And also the dice themselves, so these were the original dice. These were in the 4 suits in the game. So like this was summer and, here's like winter or something. These were originally drafted, and then whatever they were rolled was their rank. So kind of like Nikosu dice where, if this was rolled a 1, this is now a 1 in the green suit. And it's like must follow and all that. So I noticed that wasn't part of the trick play too much, especially because the cards were going to, pretty high ranks, like 10. And it became where, on average, the roll was around 3 or 4, right? So they were just like always lost, and they never would like win tricks, and it wasn't like too big when a die was played into the trick. Especially if like a die's in hand, like you want it to be a big thing, like a kind of a threat. So then I came up with the idea of having the dice be may follow, which adds, I think, a lot to the threat of the game. So like winning a trick feels good because you take a die. It's almost like a superpower because you can now toss this out whenever, and it's like a threat, right? I think part of the reason why I like it as well is that it's really clean, where like you just have the suits on the die because it isn't like ranked, it's just the weakest in the suit. So it was really cool to see the die made because now it just has all the flowers on it and the X's. So that made the dice really cool and really powerful. And there's something to where originally when the dice weren't that interesting, players would forget to grab a die. And I noticed there's something to where if you want players to remember something, it's easier for them to remember if they want to do it. If they're really like, yes! So when the die were bad, players would forget. And when we made them good, I noticed players were remembering to take a die because it was like a superpower, right? And so now one of the nice things is, since it's the endgame trigger and they're good, players are paying attention to like the whole round flow much more. So I really like that. The final thing I'll talk about, because I think I'm kind of just ranting at this point, is the X's. So the X's were a part of the game. They were kind of just like passes, and they were -1 point. I don't know if I have an example here. But essentially, they were only included at 5-player to kind of make the deck work for 5 players. And I kind of have a thing where if you include something at like a certain player count, I kind of want it at all player counts. And so thinking of ways to include the X's at all player counts, I wanted to have it to where they still like passed, which was good. But they passed in like interesting ways. So what they do now, which, I mean, you've watched the rules, so I think you probably know what they do now. But the person who gets the most X's will actually lose a point per card or dice with an X on it. But then who gets the second most gets a point per card and dice. It's really cool because I think what we were noticing was originally it was whoever got the most just loses a point per X, which totally worked because then it made players kind of lead juicier cards and didn't just like win. Because if they kept winning, people were just like, okay, yeah, you can start taking some X's, buddy, and start losing some points. So players were like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to start leading like 1s and 2s to like lose the lead and not necessarily keep winning every single trick because I'm going to get overloaded with these X cards and X dice. I'm going to lose a lot of points. But now, well, not that it was an issue, but players were like dumping X cards sometimes when they really didn't want to win or if they didn't care. But now that the X's make it so the second most get positive X points, players are holding it back. Players are holding the die, players are holding the card in interesting ways. And I like it because it gives players agency to choose, do you want this person to possibly take a minus point, or do you want to possibly get a positive point? And it feels almost like if you play the game Stick'em or Stick'em, where that has, it's totally may follow. And that game, especially like the hammer seat, that game has a lot of the decision of, do I want to get points or do I want to like make this person lose points? And I think that game kind of revolves around that decision and is a little like oversaturated with that decision. And what I like about in Mori is that that same decision is in this game, but a little bit more focused and a little bit more isolated, and it doesn't happen all the time. So it feels fresh when it does happen. And each player has those 2 X's. So there's always like this meta of, when do I use them? Or do I hold them up? You know, because they are like threats the whole game. So overall, I think like the dice, the trumping system, and the points on the cards, especially with the X's and how those score, there's a lot of interesting things now that all intermingle with each other in Mori. So that's some of the work I did on Mori. That was a huge rant. Good luck, Taylor, editing this. I will just say I kind of started with it, but I think the production's just absolutely gorgeous. Beth Sobel, her art just killed it. I love that as you go higher in the rank, they get more and more flowers, and the cards just get more and more beautiful. And what, super small thing, what I really liked was, I think there's like a theme of forests and kind of like death and skulls and stuff. And what I liked about the X cards is they're a little, you know, a little spooky, a little scary, but I know the game's theme is just kind of that, like it's the word Mori and there's forest and death, and it's kind of just like that, those 2 ideas juxtaposed. But I love in the game that like the X cards, you kind of want it, but you kind of don't want it. They can be good for you, they can be bad for you, and that's kind of what it feels like the theme is. It's almost like forest, death, like just a part of life. I don't know why I'm getting very philosophical, but yeah, it feels like it's just everything's balanced, you know, especially with the seasons. Things change, things die, things reborn. That's kind of the flow, and I like seeing that in the gameplay. And again, this is just cards and numbers, so some people won't feel that way, but I do genuinely feel like there's a little bit of beauty in the mechanic of the X's tied to the theme. Oh man, single tear just slid off my eyeball. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy Mori. It was an absolute hoot to work with Daniel on this and really make it the best it could be. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy it. Bye! Hey, welcome back. I hope you had a good time. There's other doors if you want to click them. Why not? Explore away. I'll just be here. Woo! Trick taking! Climbing shedding!